Hey, remember when Disney was a kids' media corporation? Yeah, before they started swallowing up famous IPs left and right, they were really only concerned about that sub-18 demographic, and, of course, their parents. But even long before Disney decided that hosting Deadpool on a catalog of Disney-branded movies was a-okay, they were still trying to branch out into every conceivable form of media possible. I think most computer users around my age, in some form or another, have played a Disney video game. People a bit older than me have dozens of Disney-branded console releases, people a bit younger than me have probably played more Disney apps than they can count, and people my age, well, we had the Disney virtual worlds. Post-2005 was truly the kids' MMO boom, and Disney was focusing most of their efforts onto online options. In fact, they were one of the first to kick off kids' MMOs as the huge trend that it eventually became. Now, I originally thought that I was going to do every single one of Disney's virtual worlds in one video, but I just wasn't able to do that and give the appropriate amount of attention to the phenomenon that these first three big worlds were. Before we dive into the immense topic of Disney's virtual worlds, I'd like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Atlas VPN. Atlas VPN is a service that allows you to browse the web securely from servers all over the world. Right now, you can get Atlas for just $1.99 per month by following the link in my description. Do you ever feel like you've run out of decent content on streaming services like Netflix? Well, you could start slogging through the hundreds and hundreds of hours of low-effort TV and movies, or you could start looking for the good content that's available in countries that aren't yours. And it's not just Netflix. What if you're in the mood for some Canadian programming, but you're stuck in a non-Canadian country? Well, you can just switch your VPN to the Canadian server, and the CBC is yours to conquer. And you can just switch back to the US when you want to watch some Hulu. Atlas VPN is easy to set up and use. You just download the app and hit the big switch to start browsing the internet securely from dozens of locations throughout the world. Atlas also has a designated tab for ultra-fast streaming optimized servers for seamless video and gaming experiences. Only $1.99 is a great deal for this service, and your purchase comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. You can go sign up for Atlas VPN right now by following the link in my description and pinned comment, and start browsing the internet safely right away. And now, let's get into the first and best preserved virtual world produced by Disney, Toontown. Toontown was released in the second generation of MMO games. This era, from about 2000 to 2004, consists of what most people my age consider to be very early MMOs, like RuneScape, MapleStory, and EVE Online. The first generation of MMOs, at least before the genre was revolutionized by games like Ultima Online, EverQuest, and Asheron's Call, describes the type of games that are largely intolerable to play when you're not nostalgic for them and other types of video games exist. However, it was unique in one critical way. Previous MMOs were pretty unambiguously targeted towards teen and adult gamers. This makes sense, of course. We've always known that the internet is the Wild West. Why bother making social features for little kids when it's so much safer to just keep them off the internet entirely? And Disney came in and said, because money, that's why, and got the ball rolling on one of the first ever MMOs targeted specifically towards kids. Before I continue, I would like to define a bit of the gaming jargon that you'll hear repeatedly throughout the course of this video. That being MMOs and virtual worlds. An MMO, or massively multiplayer online game, is an online game that connects you to a vast array of players. These game servers are frequently international and can contain thousands of other users. A virtual world is an MMO that simulates real social interaction within a virtual environment via a player avatar. Virtual worlds are always MMO games, but MMO games are not always virtual worlds. For example, a typical online trivia app would be an MMO game and not a virtual world. A single-player game in a very literal sense can contain a virtual world, but from the lens of gaming taxonomy, this is inaccurate. A single-player game with an expansive explorable world would be categorized within the open world genre. Taking this game and making it multiplayer with social features would turn it into a virtual world. Okay, definition's over, time for Toontown. Toontown occupies the fairly rare designation of being barely lost media. It doesn't exist anymore in its original form, but the recreated version is very faithful and similar to the original experience, with differences mostly being very subtle. Early reviews mentioned the Rewritten game's instability, but from my own personal experience, this has been fixed in later years. Toontown Rewritten is a fun time, and even more so if you can get a group of friends together to take on the cog buildings. The fact that it's free makes it even more accessible than the original game was. Toontown Online's associated archival projects represent the gold standard of MMO preservation. Let me show you why. Before we take a look at the Rewritten game itself, let's look at this related source of documentation, the Toontown Preservation Project. This site is focused on preserving the aspects of the game which aren't able to be represented in the game itself, including some history on the site's development, and includes not only concept art from the pencil to 3D stage, but also more in-depth and niche development details like roadmaps, meeting notes, scholarly publications, and hundreds of pages of design and programming reference. This website is really worth a visit if you're interested in more details about Toontown's development. It is rare and incredibly special to have this level of access to granular detail about any video game's development, much less a defunct MMO. According to these documents, Toontown Online began development in 1999 and remained in continuous development through the majority of the second-generation MMO era before officially launching on June 2, 2003. It was conceptualized and constructed by Disney's VR studio, which began as a facet of Disney's Imagineering and migrated to the Walt Disney Internet Group, known today as Disney Interactive. I love looking at these ultra-early concepts that get made before anyone expects polished visuals. They all have a certain back-of-homework assignment quality. Much of the more polished concept art is credited to Bruce Woodside, who was a major force behind the design of the character models and cogs, and donated a great wealth of material to the Preservation Project. One document released just after Toontown's debut was a scholarly journal publication which detailed the precise intentions behind the creation of this game. The driving force of the Toontown project was a combination of the desire to capitalize on this burgeoning MMO gaming market while creating a project with as much mass market appeal as possible, in a way that's not alienating to established gamers but also certainly not pandering to them. Toontown could be more accurately described as a family game than a kids game. Disney was interested in maintaining a broad audience. Younger kids could have fun messing around and doing whatever they want, while older kids and adults could focus in on the more strategic and teamwork-based gameplay elements. The intended age demographic begins at 7 and does not cap out. In outlining their approach for mass market appeal, they detail their intentional deviation from the conventions of MMOs released at the time. The mass perception of MMO games at the turn of the millennia were as follows: swords, knights and dragons, or spaceships, blasters, and aliens. Very genre-oriented topics, and at the time, fantasy and sci-fi were considered pretty much entirely the realm of preteen and teen boys. Although Disney isn't known to make Christian media, they're also keenly disinterested in alienating Christian parents. As such, Toontown is washed clean of any supernatural undertones, occult elements, or violence beyond the most cartoonish and slapstick possible options. The game itself centers around the conflict of toons versus cogs. Toons being colorful anthropomorphic animals with a culture centered around fun, expression, and joy, who are being overtaken and suppressed by the evil cogs, who represent mindless corporate drones. By the way, isn't it kind of funny when these corporations intentionally seek out the least controversial type of conflict that they can possibly add to their story, they end up condemning the practices of their own company? Like, oh yeah, these evil corporate overlords need to be taken down. Not us, not us, the ones that aren't real. Please disregard any similarities. I'm curious how aware the original Toontown Online team was of this slightly grim irony. Like, did they call their business administrators cash bots and law bots? Was anybody in that position disturbed about how they were being portrayed as in direct opposition to the spirit of art and creativity? Who knows? Toontown used a tiered chat censorship system that would go on to be adopted by many other kids' MMOs. In this game, this manifested as the basic speed chat, or the menu-based chat, and Speed Chat Plus, a whitelist typing-based chat. The original game had the Secret Friends feature, which connected two players by sharing a uniquely generated code. I'm not sure why, but this feature is referred to in-game as True Friends, but consistently among fans as Secret Friends. This Secret Friends feature is one of the game details that didn't make it into Toontown Rewritten because the code generation feature proved to be an issue. However, the two-tiered chat system remains. The Secret Friends feature allowed users to chat with each other with a less restrictive chat system. It's unclear how the censorship differed from Speed Chat Plus. Another form of chat available among friends was Whisper, which allowed you to send direct chat messages to friends when they weren't in the same area as you. One aspect that's unrepresented in the Rewritten game is Disney's efforts to make Toontown Online into a tangible experience. Instead of a digital download, original Toontown Online had to be purchased with a disc, which would come with a certain amount of subscription time. To further incentivize subscriptions, users would receive a Toontown trading card and newsletter in the mail each month that they remained a subscriber. These physical components were considered essential in a market that was at the time highly suspicious of subscription-based gaming. The game began offering a website-based digital download a few years later, abandoning the need for a physical disc. The membership structure evolved over time as well, going from a fully paywalled model where you'd lose access to your account a few days after your subscription expired, to a split free-to-pay and paid model where free players could complete a limited amount of gameplay before the imposed restrictions made continuing just about impossible. Toontown's subscription price was pretty steep, especially for a game released in 2003. $9.95 for a monthly subscription, $49.95 for 6 months, and $79.95 for a year. There was also a 3-month option for $24.95, which I believe may have only been available with a physical card. That's $120 for a year for the shortest subscription cycle. That $80 annual subscription, the best deal out of the three, would turn out to about $130 today. And if you're like most kids and only getting the monthly because that's all your allowance can afford, that turns out to over $195 in 2023. We've largely become acclimated to subscriptions with this kind of annual charge, but no matter what you choose, a Toontown membership was a pretty major expense for a kid. This wasn't as expensive as some other MMOs from the time like World of Warcraft, but the adult user base of those other games justified the higher price point. I imagine Toontown abandoned the fully paywalled approach because getting parents to pay that much repeatedly for a kid's video game is a pretty hard sell. Toontown visually suffers a bit from being such an early 3D online game, but I wouldn't say that the graphics are terrible by any means. There's clearly a lot of care put into the design here. However, I would say that the cogs do tend to be a little, terrifying. The Rewritten project is a very high-quality recreation of the original game, and so I'll be using footage of that. Any YouTube rips that are documenting the original game will be credited on screen. The game begins with customizing your Toon character. You can choose between a selection of animals, builds, and colors, and then dress them up. Afterwards, you're dropped into the world of Toontown. The helpful NPC explains the objective of the game. You know, fighting gentrification, and gives you your first 2 gags, which in this game are your attack options. One of the differences in the rewritten version is that the tutorial no longer prominently features Mickey Mouse, in order to make it more clear that the rewritten version is not affiliated with Disney. Afterwards, you're sent out to fight your first cog. After completing this tutorial battle, you're introduced to another core game mechanic, which is the Game Trolley. The Game Trolley is Toontown's main means of procuring the in-game currency jelly beans, and takes you away to a randomly generated minigame, in which you will gain more or less beans based on your performance. Once you're dropped into the main world after the tutorial, other users may come up and join you, adding a competitive or cooperative aspect to these minigames. Once you complete the game, you can replenish your supply of gags, and then either return to the overworld or continue to grind for beans. Soon after this, you're introduced to your estate, which is the home customization aspect of Toontown Online. Through your home, you can call into Clarabelle's catalog, where you can order furniture and other character customization elements using jelly beans. After this tutorial section, you begin proper gameplay in earnest. You're given a series of simple quests built around destroying specific amounts and types of cogs. This is the fundamental gameplay loop of Toontown Online. As your level progresses, it becomes more imperative to collaborate with the players in the same room. It's especially crucial for taking down cog buildings, which is this game's dungeon mechanic. As you progress, you unlock more and more of the map, which you're discouraged from just mindlessly exploring due to the presence of increasingly tough enemies. The streets of Toontown are expansive and full of buildings that you can enter, but unfortunately the vast majority of these buildings are only facades staffed by a single NPC to create a quest initiation point. This has the unfortunate side effect of making every building in Toontown appear to be a money laundering front. Toontown's cooperative gameplay comes in a couple varieties of raids which involve increasing levels of player ability and team cooperation as you ascend through the ranks of cogs. Each type of cog has its own designated building-only high-level enemies and its own final boss located in their respective headquarters. For the Sell Bots, that's the Senior Vice President of Sales, or VP. For the Cash Bots, it's the Chief Financial Officer, or CFO. For the Law Bots, it's the Chief Justice. And for the Boss Bots, the CEO. Geez, this guy is terrifying. This character once mentioned a chairman, or boss of all cogs, but if this character was ever planned, it was never implemented. Cellbot Headquarters was the first of the headquarters to be released and was located at the peninsula of Oak Street in the Daisy Gardens area. This headquarters was a more expansive and intense location than ever previously released before and required a dedicated team of experienced players to complete. The courtyard served as the entrance and team gathering point. Here you could find other players who wanted to confront the bosses inside. Once you gathered your team, you'd begin storming the base. I'll be examining the Cellbot headquarters as the prototypical example of a high-level cog building. It's divided into two major areas, the factory and the towers. Users had to complete the factory segment first, as it would provide the user with cog pieces to assemble a disguise for entry into Cellbot towers. A complete suit would require the user to run the factory 10 times in total. You could bring a maximum party of 8 members with you into Cellbot towers. When you arrive, you're treated to an introductory cutscene where the Vice President realizes that Toons have infiltrated his headquarters. He then starts sending enemies after your party. First a barrage of cogs ranging from level 1 to 12, and then a round of level 8 to 12 skelecogs, and then you face the Vice President himself. In this battle, the party is given an unlimited amount of pies to throw at the VP when his undercarriage exposes his weak point. When this is damaged, he becomes temporarily stunned, during which time the Toons can push the VP back towards the edge of a platform and ultimately sentence it to the ultimate Disney villain fate, falling from a high place. Afterwards, Toons will be rewarded with skill points, Toontask credits, and an SOS card which allow the player to summon an NPC for a special attack. That's about it for gameplay. I wasn't sure where else to mention this, but besides Toontown Rewritten, there's one other very highly regarded private Toontown server, Toontown Corporate Clash. This is essentially Toontown Plus. Instead of being as close to a one-to-one recreation of Toontown as possible, Corporate Clash takes some liberties with adding new features. There's new areas, new enemies, new abilities, and even new toons that you can be. I haven't played Corporate Clash myself, but the concept sounds pretty cool and might be a good option if the standard gameplay of Toontown sounds a little too simple for you. Anyways, now that we've covered the game, let's take a look at the culture. You know how you know, and I mean you really know, that Toontown is a proper MMO title? Because people can be real obnoxious, arrogant assholes about failure to play the game in the most optimized possible manner. Just like the big boy games. This applies to the original and the remake alike, but arguably the modern version is worse about this due to the generally older player base. While I've never personally run into this, I've heard several high-level players describe this as an increasingly pervasive issue as you make more advanced progress. These players are known in the Toontown player base as elitists, and the stereotypical form of the elitist is a cat avatar with square glasses, although these players can come in any form. Typical elitist behavior involves spamming the chat with question marks over making a less than perfectly efficient gag choice, rage-quitting team efforts over people making minor mistakes, refusing to interact with low-level players, and just generally taking the game so seriously that they and everyone around them completely stop having fun. I genuinely do consider this evidence of Toontown being a successful MMO, because I don't think the subculture would exist if there wasn't some real incentive for players to behave this way. The fact that so many people take it too seriously is a sign of quality in and of itself, because you don't see this kind of player behavior in games that are too simple and unchallenging to warrant any sort of real cooperation. However, that doesn't stop the practice from basically being hilarious at every level. Like, it's already a little pathetic to get mad at somebody for not perfectly optimizing in a video game, and that's really taken to the nth degree when the game is literally this. On the opposite end of the spectrum were troll players who would engage in a behavior known as greening. This means intentionally allowing your teammates to lose all their health and is called such because this turns your icon green. These players would often wait until the final boss of the level to start messing with the other players. This could come in the form of taking inappropriately low-level action or no action at all, teaming up with another greener and repeatedly healing each other and allowing the remaining party members to fend for themselves, using a glitch to trap a party member in the elevator and force them to fight the boss on their own, intentionally disrupting the VP's stun, just logging out when you arrive at the final boss, and basically every other way you can imagine of just being completely useless. Hyper-optimized gameplay to the detriment of other players, like abandoning your group to get a better SOS card, can also be considered greening. Greening was a bannable offense in the original Toontown and remains to be in the rewritten version. In its later years, as more and more attention was being divested away from Toontown and towards other more financially promising projects, Toontown gradually became infamous for being easy to exploit. Come 2013, Toontown's server infrastructure hadn't been updated in years, and was just becoming more and more vulnerable to player exploitation. This might have been an easy fix in earlier years, but at this point, the manpower behind Toontown Online had been slashed. One of the more fondly remembered exploits was the server-side Meet Here hack, which allowed users to fast travel to parts of the map that would usually be too difficult to reach. With this hack, users would move to a specific location on the map and input Meet Here into the speed chat. A toon would immediately appear and give you a friend request and ask where would you like to go. And then you would select a named location from the speed chat menu. The toon would then leave and send a whisper chat message asking you to teleport to them, which you then do. The toon then immediately unfriends you and disappears. I love the entire concept of this hack. Not only is it a player utility that anyone can use, there's just something so delightfully eerie about it, like summoning a ghost whose only purpose is to help you fast travel. On the less intensive and generally less helpful end of things, the Toontown Injector tool allowed script kiddies to modify their user data to a variety of chaotic ends. This could result in unnaturally strong or rich characters, using inaccessible avatar colors, and for more trollish purposes, duplicated avatars and T-pose filling up a neighborhood with more objects than old computers could handle, which made the game unplayable for most users. Hacked accounts would also sometimes clog the servers to a degree that nobody else was able to log in. The state of Toontown's data security in its final years was bad enough that it's kind of a miracle that they didn't suffer a really bad data leak. I suppose the hackers targeting Toontown were more interested in jamming the servers with T-posing toons than trying to steal data. Aside from hacking, Toontown also had a variety of bugs and glitches that people would use both for trolling and just for the sheer novelty of glitching your game. One of these glitches was the Door of Doom, in which the player would place their closet behind the exit to their estate, which would cause anyone leaving to have their game immediately crash. One of the more utilitarian glitches was the Walking Through Walls glitch, in which you play the game's cog thief or maze game on the game trolley and allow yourself to be hit by a cog. If the player immediately enters the Cellbot factory after doing this, collision detection for walls would be turned off entirely, allowing you to fast travel much more quickly and bypass difficult segments of the buildings and headquarters. However, doing this in cooperative segments without every other team member's permission may be considered greening. Players could level up their toons more quickly by exploiting a glitch that occurred during cog invasion events. If you went to a district with an active invasion and then teleported into Welcome Valley, the cogs that would spawn on the surrounding streets would be standard cogs instead of the powered-up invasion cogs, but would still yield the double gag bonus. Toontown had many other glitches, most of which are less replicable and likely due entirely to programming or server errors. Many of these are documented in old YouTube uploads of Toontown Online gameplay. But all of these pale in comparison to what, in my opinion, is the holy grail of Toontown glitches, the vast nothingness known as the Gray. This was an out-of-bounds area that could be accessed through unintentional weak points in the walls and floors, or by activating the collision detection glitch I mentioned before. For example, a few fences in the playground of Donald's Dock in the original Toontown Online had no collision detection at all, simply allowing players to walk through into the Gray. Once you're in the Gray, you can travel for a seemingly limitless distance, and the further you go, the more distorted and broken the visuals and controls become, similar to the Farlands in Minecraft. You can escape the Gray by fast traveling to a different location. The Gray is one of the best little pieces of unintentional lore that I've ever seen in a video game, because in a world where it's established that the villains represent a force of gray bleakness, isn't it kind of existentially horrifying to realize that that's all there is out there? Outside of your known world, there's only the Gray. Maybe that's what the cogs are fighting for. This is the world where they've already won. The signs of Toontown's demise came long before any official notice. The increasing incidence of hackers was proof of Disney's dwindling attention on the project, as more and more of their efforts were being redirected to support other ventures. The closure date was announced on August 20th, 2013, and would be followed by a series of events to celebrate the game and its user base. First, membership was made free and redundant payments were refunded. What followed was a storm of rapid-fire site events that would usually run through the course of a year. First, on August 23rd, the Silly Meter was kicked off, which is usually the April Fool's event, and Clarabelle's catalog was expanded to include every possible item. A week later, on August 30th, the Halloween event kicked off, enabling all toons to go trick-or-treating and purchase costumes. Yet another week later, on September 6th, a winter holiday event was launched, allowing users to throw winter parties and go caroling. This event ended on Friday the 13th, and was replaced by an event which turned every player temporarily into a black cat, a special avatar previously only available on Halloween. Users could also create new permanent Black Cat avatars, although they would only be available for just a little less than 1 week. The final hours of Toontown Online were tragically anticlimactic. Many users were barred from saying their last goodbyes on the day of closure because at some point during the morning of the 19th, the servers stopped connecting any users attempting to log in. After this point, only users logged in prior to this incident were able to see the final moments of the website. The Toontown Fandom Wiki alleges that this problem was due to hacker activity, and the issue wasn't able to be fixed before the official shutdown. If this claim is true, then I think it's safe to say that Toontown hackers were determined to ruin everyone's fun till the very end. Despite the less than stellar final hours, I think this series of celebrations before the game's closure is a great example of respecting a game's player base at the end of its life. Now, it's a very common misconception among the Toontown player base that Club Penguin is the reason that it closed. The Toontown Wiki claims that the closing page cited Club Penguin's name directly, but there actually isn't any evidence of this, and contradicts the closure page FAQ from both the date of closure and immediately after. I have to assume that this was just an extremely pervasive rumor. Club Penguin may have absorbed some of the staff of Toontown, but the real killer was their common enemy: mobile apps. Smartphones and tablets were seeing wider and wider adoption, and it's awfully easy to get people to spend a lot, and I mean a lot more money on a single mobile game. So that's right, Toontown fans, it's not this guy you have to blame for Toontown going under, it's this guy. The fact of the matter is, Toontown closed because kids just weren't playing their games on the computer anymore. Tablet and mobile-based gaming pretty much completely took over after 2010, and every kid's gaming company wanted to make the switch, including Disney, despite how much this would disappoint the fans of the long-running MMO. fans would be quick to pick up the slack. The founders of the Toontown Rewritten project knew about the site's impending closure before it was announced, and therefore they were able to gather enough of a team to announce the Toontown Rewritten project on the same day of Toontown Online's closure. It had its first alpha release only a month later on October 28, 2013. This and the subsequent beta release would only be available to a small amount of testers. 1 year after the announcement of Toontown's closure, Toontown Rewritten's open beta was released to the public on August 20th, 2014. 3 years of development later, the 2.0 update was released, turning the game into a near-complete recreation of the original Toontown Online. So, what was it that made Toontown such an unambiguously fondly remembered success story? Well, more than anything, Toontown is just a good game. It's well built, the UI issues are easy to overlook, and it feels rewarding to progress. It's pretty slow moving, but people who are used to playing games from the early 2000s probably won't be too put off by the inefficient pace. It's just a fun MMO, and it really does feel inclusive to all ages. I never got the impression that there were any widespread creepy cultural issues with this game like some other kids' MMOs, and you can choose to play at your own pace. It's not a huge faux pas to fail to optimize your gaming unless you've landed yourself in a particularly try-hard circle of users. However, it is rewarding to the people that choose to do so. A combination of all of these factors has led Toontown Online to be easily the most thoroughly documented lost MMO game, to the point that it's barely lost at all. Toontown was and is beloved, and it's easy to understand why.
Toontown, are you toon enough?
I need to be honest. I am not going to write a full history of Club Penguin. I should not write a full history of Club Penguin, because I did not play Club Penguin. It was so wildly popular, and it still is, and as somebody who never played it in any meaningful capacity, I just feel like my version of the history of the site would be too derivative to be worth making. Izzy's thoroughly covered Club Penguin's history a while back, and I recommend you watch that video if you'd like to see a comprehensive history of Club Penguin. Instead, I present this compromise, a collection of the most rare and bizarre facts about Club Penguin that I could find. I hope that in this segment I might be able to provide some new information to even experienced Club Penguin players. For those who don't know, Club Penguin was a straightforward social MMO where you had a penguin avatar and used it to interact in this digital world and play minigames. Club Penguin was a pioneer in the two-tiered membership model, with players being given the option to pay subscription to gain access to features like dress up, more colors for your penguin, and other additional customization options, as well as access to exclusive features and parties and events. Now, the thing about Club Penguin is it's not necessarily a lore-rich game. However, that didn't stop some strange things from popping up around the game anyways, because as a natural consequence of being the most popular, you're going to find some bizarre subcultures no matter what. You need to understand that, unlike today, playing games on the internet wasn't really something that everyone did. This gatekeeping manifested in two distinct ways, one financial and one social. One, you needed to have access to a computer to be on these websites, and even more so than now, that was not a given. And two, you needed to not care that playing games on the internet was kind of seen as a lame thing to do. This resulted in most online games having a core audience of mostly privileged kids and teens who struggle with interpersonal relationships, which becomes a potent breeding ground for some of the most bizarre, chronically online behavior possible. Club Penguin was hardly the worst offender for hosting bizarre subcultures, but that doesn't change the fact that it was a popular mid to late 2000s online hangout, and therefore it will inherently contain some oddities. I understand that the social phenomenon of Pookies has been covered already, but I need to address this. Not only was it easily the most frequently mentioned topic in the comments regarding weird memories about Club Penguin, there is an entire complicated ecosystem around this phenomenon that I'd like to attempt to untangle. Well, where else to begin looking into Pookies but the designated Club Penguin Pookie Fandom Wiki? This has more information than I'd ever bargained for, and some extremely specific descriptions on what Pookies are, how to be one, how to speak like one, and so on. Pookies are simply Club Penguin's social standard for adoption roleplay. To become a Pookie, you would usually change your penguin's color to yellow and engage in some extremely standardized roleplay behavior, all of which are detailed here, and includes things like designated outfit items acceptable for swimming, skating, and other types of play. Pookies utilized a specific grammatical convention that I would describe as middling between baby talk and a squeaky toy, and these Pookies would set themselves up in the pet shop and beg to be adopted by a character who would play the role of Moo Moo or Dada. These parents would also fall into archetypes like nice, mean, and rich. Now, if you've been online long enough, this may be setting off some alarm bells. Let me address the elephant in the room. Is this a thing that's not appropriate for kids to be doing? Well, not always, but also sort of. Were there people engaging with this content with inappropriate intentions? Yes. However, was it all of them? Definitely not, and it's impossible to guess the ratio of kids who were just interested in playing out a dramatic soap opera narrative, which ones were nursing a latent, and which ones were adults seeking easy access to kids. The existence of the subtype tummy pookies, or unborn pookies, I think gives lie to the fact that at least for some people there was something a little weird going on. It wasn't always creepy, but it could easily become very disturbing in the hands of the wrong kind of person. I definitely credit this potentially sinister aspect as the reason why this phenomenon sticks in so many people's minds as a weird and unsettling part of playing on Club Penguin. I think there's something non-coincidentally similar to lifestyle guides and the extremely specific and ritualistic descriptions of how to be a Pookie, down to the types of Pookies that you can choose to be. For a lot of users who partook, however, this similarity was entirely irrelevant, because the main allure for them was just having a good time role-playing and creating drama. I can say with confidence, however, that there does exist a population of people who found out that they have a thing for mommies via Club Penguin. Something that I find hilarious is the rise of Pookie hate communities, which is also documented on this wiki. Few people on either side of the argument were really equipped to understand the more potentially sinister implications of Pookieism, so these criticisms were dismissed as meaningless hate-mongering. However, in retrospect, I think it's easier to understand why exactly these onlookers were made so uncomfortable. At the same time, I understand why ex-Pookies can be so defensive of the practice. It's difficult to be accused of creepy behavior when you were acting with genuinely pure intentions. However, it can be difficult to acknowledge that there may be borderline or even overtly illegal behavior in your community that presents in a way that's indistinguishable from normal roleplay most of the time. This Pookie community has a concept known as the AMP scale. I don't know the meaning of this acronym, but I assume the P is for Pookie. This scale describes a Pookie's level of dysfunctional behavior. The 4 bottom tiers describe what is essentially expected player behavior, with the Diva tier being a moderately dysfunctional but acceptable roleplay character archetype. The 3 tiers at the top describe over-the-line player behavior that may potentially break site rules. The first of these tiers is known as Melds, or Mean Evil Lying Divas. This tier has a Moo equivalent, the Mean Evil Lying Moo-Moos. This basically describes cruel and antagonistic player behavior that crosses the boundaries of roleplay and into overt bullying. It's unclear how the category above this, Drama Llamas, differs from this tier, but probably just describes a more dedicated and aggressive type of troll. The last tier is known as the Domino Divas and are called such because they encourage other players to engage in rule-breaking or overtly cruel behavior. This wiki describes Domino Divas as bribing their siblings into being trolls, but I'm a bit unclear about how this would work because I was under the impression that you couldn't really exchange items or currency on Club Penguin. The second largest roleplay subculture that I found while researching Club Penguin was the fandom that built up around the secret agent gameplay aspect. In the game existed an organization called the Penguin Secret Agency, or PSA. Becoming a secret agent unlocked an entire branch of gameplay with probably the most distinct and developed NPC relations that the game had. To become a secret agent, you essentially promised to become a moderation assistant. You had to submit a questionnaire with some pretty obvious correct answers to confirm your knowledge of the rules and how to help enforce them. I don't think the secret agent position held much weight as far as moderation goes because players were incentivized to choose the correct answers regardless of what their real intentions were. This was because of all the additional gameplay unlocked by the secret agent route. I have to imagine that this role went to some kids' heads and they got way over-invested in becoming a Club Penguin cop. You imply any level of power over other people in a game and there's going to be somebody who takes that too seriously. But beyond that, you had a lot of people who became really attached to the secret agent narrative. This would result in roleplay groups popping in both within Club Penguin and outside of it. There are some characters associated with the secret agent route that the fandom was particularly attached to. Most notably, a red penguin referred to as Jetpack Guy, a blue penguin named Gary the Gadget Guy, and an antagonistic polar bear named Herbert P. Bear. I know a lot of you already know where this is going. You've got Cool Guy. You've got Nerd Guy. You've got Evil Guy with a perpetual evil smirk. If you've been in fandom spaces for long enough, you should already know that things are about to get very gay very quickly. There are fanworks for just about every possible ship combination, including ex-reader and original characters, and I've heard in the site's heyday there were tons of designated RP chat rooms themed around the secret agent narrative. I don't want to get too into the details because I don't want to send any trolls after these fan artists and writers, but just know that this bear permanently affected the brain chemistry of an untold number of young gay furries. Other roleplay events in Club Penguin tended to be more spontaneous, like this alleged zombie apocalypse server-wide event. Club Penguin's main draw wasn't really the gameplay itself, but the abundant presence of other people and the relative freedom that they had to interact. Club Penguin didn't use the speed chat system ubiquitous in other Disney's virtual worlds, I assume as a result of Club Penguin being an acquisition rather than a Disney invention. Club Penguin's word filter was generally known to be more generous than most. Unfortunately, this led to some players attempting to have more risque role-playing sessions, and exploited some common animations to put their penguins in compromising situations. Club Penguin has some interesting history surrounding the puffles, or pet creatures that you could adopt. Puffles, along with clothes, were one of the main pillars of Club Penguin's class hierarchy. Membership greatly increased the amount of puffles you could own, from 2 to 75. The rainbow and golden puffles were instances of actualized rumors within the Club Penguin community. The rainbow puffle rumor is listed as debunked on a Mythbusters discussion section of the Club Penguin wiki, which was accurate at the time and just never updated. The rumor of the rainbow puffle is tied to the tip the iceberg rumor, which was famously fulfilled upon Club Penguin's closure. Supposedly, if you successfully participated in tipping the iceberg, you would receive access to an iceberg exclusive catalog where you'd be able to buy a rainbow puffle. Hold on. Did the tip the iceberg rumor come about because kids misunderstood the phrase tip of the iceberg? I mean, if you think about it, an iceberg is definitely not something that can be tipped over. Did some kids think tip of the iceberg was like an event and not a place? Maybe they thought it was a pun? It's a mystery. This was not ultimately the way that Rainbow Puffles would be introduced. Instead, they were introduced at the side event Puffle Party 2013, where players could adopt their own Rainbow Puffles if they completed enough tasks to launch themselves from the Rainbow Cannon on the roof of Puffle Hotel. All players had the opportunity to obtain a Rainbow Puffle, but non-members had a waiting period imposed on the required tasks. 2013 must have been the year for fan service Puffle releases because that was also the year that the Golden Puffle was introduced. Players would unlock the opportunity to adopt a Gold Puffle for themselves. Gold Puffles could only be unlocked by members. In the end, only a few rumored Puffles never got made. First is the abominable Snow Puffle, which looks like a white Puffle but much larger, the Meteor Puffle, which would have been from space, the Fuchsia Puffle, and the Clear or Transparent Puffle. The existence of penguin ninjas also initially began as a rumor, first sparked by the existence of ninja mask accessories in Club Penguin's prior iteration, Penguin Chat. The release of ninja characters throughout the game Card Jitsu sparked even further rumors about the existence of shadow ninjas, which would come in the form of ultra-rare invincible cards. This shadow ninja character, known as Ninja O Dark, was never implemented because just randomly making certain games unwinnable is not a good mechanic. Like many of these fan characters, their only ever sightings were in the form of user impersonations, as shown here with the sighting of Ninja O Dark. However, beyond Ninja O Dark, there was some genuine evidence that the shadow element was an unreleased gameplay feature in Card Jitsu. Players discovered this image of a dark ninja suit in the game's files, clearly captioned Card Jitsu Shadow. The gem that is visible on this costume's forehead matches with the dark stone set into the center of the ninja amulet, implying a relation to the other elemental gems. Because this costume existed within the game's files, hackers were able to obtain the Shadow Ninja outfit and wear it. It's not clear why this element of the game was scrapped, but I think it might have something to do with that balance issue that I mentioned before. A 3-element game setup is extremely stable, and adding a 4th element which is implied to be more powerful than the others is an easy way to break the game. It ruins the fun for anyone who isn't benefiting from that 4th ultimate element. Another rumor-only character was Rockhopper's ninja brother, who seems to alternate between also being referred to as Rockhopper and the extremely creative name Ninja Hopper. This character had been canonized in a private server called Free Penguin, although this server seems to no longer be active, or maybe I just can't find it. In the comments of my Fast Food Worlds video where I asked people to leave their strangest memories about Club Penguin, one user alleged a mythical event called the Great Fire of Club Penguin, which is corroborated on this fanwiki page. I assume this might have been a role-playing event that accidentally got codified into Club Penguin lore for some people. This comment describes the event as the entire setting of Club Penguin suffering a horrible fire, causing everyone to have to release their puffles and escape onto Rockhopper's ship. The fanwiki descriptions of this event are even more dire, describing several penguins as having been killed in the flames. Of course, this never happened because that's extremely grim. Finally, I would like to try to answer the following question. Why are Club Penguin private servers like Club Penguin Rewritten so much more vulnerable to shutdowns than other Disney Rewritten projects? Why does Disney care about stomping out the majority of the large Club Penguin servers, but they're perfectly content with Toontown Rewritten? Even among the servers that are still active, almost every single one has faced some type of attempted legal action by Disney. Nobody outside of those intimately familiar with Disney's legal practices can claim to know for sure, but there are a few safe bets. The most glaring issue is the fundamental problem with the social interactions that existed in the game itself. The Disney Corporation is extremely concerned with brand image, and they are incentivized to care about things as soon as fan activity starts negatively impacting that. The problem with Club Penguin was that it damaged Disney's brand integrity while it was still active due to creepy and inappropriate player behavior. There was just something messed up about Club Penguin's chat censorship system, because when I was researching for this video, I found multiple instances of people using extremely severe racial slurs and not getting banned. These same users would turn around and use the F word and get banned instantly. This censorship was just way overly weak for a kids game. And this becomes much more of a problem in the hands of people who refuse to moderate their private servers. I'm not going to get into the details of what happened with those servers now because I'm actually planning to save that for a future Patreon exclusive video, which is intended to come out with the second part of this video. For now, let's just say that these revival projects are just magnets for explosive drama, and the Club Penguin revivals are hardly the only culprit. So there's actually been a bit of breaking news here. One day before this video is supposed to be up, the private server Club Penguin Legacy has just received a takedown notice from Disney and is in the process of shutting down. This is actually a bit of a unique case because this one has a really glaringly obvious reason for its shutdown. In the third image from the closure announcement, it clearly states that they've had a Patreon open to help them with server costs. The first rule of making a rewritten game is that you under no circumstances accept money from anybody. Every single one of the big rewritten projects you can think of is paid out of pocket at a loss. Asking for donations is just seriously irresponsible. If you ever encounter a rewritten project asking for donations, do not give them your money. Warn other people against giving them money, and to be safe, probably just abandon ship entirely. At least that way, it'll hurt less when it's inevitably slapped by legal. This game probably had some Club Penguin typical user issues, but the fact that money was changing hands put this project's death on the fast track. Despite all the issues with the biggest servers catching heat from Disney, it's just much more possible to create private servers for Club Penguin than it is for most other defunct MMOs. I can't really point to one that's the big, broadly accepted server in the same that Toontown Rewritten is, but just know that Club Penguin is still out there, albeit unofficially. In the midst of the kids' virtual world craze, Disney was releasing new options left and right, and the most notable of these later releases was the Disney Fairies-themed MMO, Pixie Hollow. Before I proceed, I would like to give a huge thanks to Disney's OnlineWorlds.com, which has been an absolutely tremendous resource in regards to these worlds that aren't as carefully preserved as Toontown or Club Penguin. It has a huge amount of documentation and primary sources for most of these games. Many of the specific features that would otherwise be lost are frozen in time on this wiki because they were written while the sites were active and intended to serve as player guides. The link's in the description if you'd like to check that out. I would recommend following that link because it is very difficult to find on search engines. Another great resource for Pixie Hollow is this blog, Art of Disney Fairies, which is full of concept art for the Pixie Hollow MMO as well as the Disney Fairies franchise in general. I would like to give a quick disclaimer that this game went through a lot of changes over the years, so if I describe something that doesn't match up to your memory, it's likely that I'm describing a feature from a different point in the game's timeline. The beta version of Pixie Hollow debuted on September 20th, 2008. Prior to the main release, they ran 5 preview events, which showcased a playable but limited version of the beta game. This graphic from October 2008 sums up the main gameplay features, the first of which is experience. This is a descriptor that's generally too broad and vague to be a real draw, but the experience in question is getting to be a fairy. Frankly, you don't even have to have a good game after that because you present the concept of you, yes you kid, you get to be a Tinkerbell fairy, and you're going to have kids showing up no matter what. I think this assessment may not be too off base. I asked my Twitter followers what the main appeal of Pixie Hollow was for them, and a resounding majority of people who had played the game said it was the Disney Fairies aspect, unlike the majority of Club Penguin players who cited the gameplay as the main draw. I think this alone makes the conceit for Pixie Hollow an absolute no-brainer for a kid's virtual world. Next is Customize, which describes the ability to make a personalized avatar in living space. Play, which describes a variety of minigames like Firefly Light Up, Butterfly Painter, Tinker Toss, and Petal Pickup. Finally, there's Collect, which describes the gathering and crafting portion of the gameplay experience. Playing Pixie Hollow began with a Create a Fairy menu. First, you select your gender. In this game, you can choose between being a fairy or being a Sparrowman, or boy fairy. Sparrowmen weren't added until an update in April 2010, which increased the game's overall inclusivity. Then you select your fairy talent, which describes the power that your fairy embodies. There's the animal talent, described as adventurous animal lovers, the garden talent, described as highly connected with nature, the light talent, described as natural leaders, the tinker talent, described as adept problem solvers, and the water talent, described as mellow and easygoing. Afterwards, you customize your fairy's appearance, and if you're making your account early enough in the site's run, get to customize their outfit as well. The visuals in this game were honestly stunning. These backgrounds are just so gorgeous and carefully crafted. Many of these staggeringly beautiful pieces of background art were created by Eric Reimer. These environments are genuinely some of the most beautiful Flash game settings I've ever seen. This is a level of intricacy seldom seen in browser games. I'm still not really convinced that Pixie Hollow was very good as far as gameplay was concerned, but the art direction was just so incredibly solid that I can see why it drew people in regardless. The music is also remarkably good for Flash game content, despite how compressed it is by necessity. I've been using the soundtrack of Pixie Hollow in the background of this segment, and these tracks were pretty much movie quality. The whole game provided a really pleasant and relaxing sensory experience. The titular location of Pixie Hollow is in the secret heart of Neverland. Within the land of Pixie Hollow, the 4 seasons coexist at all times, each one ruled by a corresponding minister. The fairies in Pixie Hollow are responsible for bringing the seasons to the rest of the world, which is the fundamental purpose of that gathering mechanic that I mentioned before. However, I'm not sure that this was really codified in the gameplay because in the documentation I haven't seen anything about an actual season change mechanic that players can influence. I'm a bit unclear about the overarching plotline of the Disney Fairies franchise, but I'm under the impression that all of this is technically set before the events of Peter Pan, despite Tinkerbell acting extremely out of character in that movie compared to any other Disney Fairies media. I find it odd that they tried to weave it into the same universe at all. Quick aside, I'm wondering if any of you will be able to change my mind about this. Was Tinkerbell not absolutely justified about not wanting to be a Tinker Fairy? I feel like she was. It's the least magical out of all the talents and least directly involved in the changing of the seasons. I feel like the main draw of the Tinker talent is the fact that Tinkerbell is in that group, and that's not a draw when you are Tinkerbell. And yeah, the role is important, all the other roles need their tools, but that just means you get to do the job that's important instead of the jobs that are fun and magical. I think if I was forced to be a Tinker Fairy, I'd be annoyed too. Upon release, Pixie Hollow had 2 available areas, Spring Valley and Autumn Forest, which would later be expanded to include Summer Glade and Winter Woods. These larger areas were subdivided into smaller meadows, which acted as hangouts and hub spots for shops and minigames. While you're in one of these meadows, you can hit the Fly Up button to get a bird's eye view of the map and fast travel to another location. In this world, you'd be able to find the well-known Disney fairies like Silvermist, Iridessa, and of course Tinkerbell herself, who would hand out quests to users. Only paid members were able to complete several quests from the same fairy. I've heard many users say that they would repeatedly make and abandon accounts due to the content for free-to-play users being pretty front-loaded. Scattered throughout the world are these ingredients which you pick up as you fly around. It seemed like this was initially just a collectathon mechanic, but as new updates were implemented, the collectibles started being used in a more complex crafting mechanic where you could use these items to build your own clothes and furniture. The clothes crafting mechanic was called tailoring and led you through a selection of 8 minigames. First, you dye the fabric in a minigame called Roly-Poly Painting, getting a better score if you cover the swatch thoroughly. Next is caterpillar cutting, where you cut out the pattern using a caterpillar to follow the dots. Then is pattern placing, where you assemble the pieces like a jigsaw puzzle, spider stitching, a reaction time game where the garment is sewn together, beading, where you match the displayed pattern of beads, button search, where you find the correct color of buttons in a pile, knitting, where you match the correct color yarn to its corresponding squares on the grid, and finally shearing, where you remove the correct color of fur from a furry rainbow caterpillar. Woof, that's a lot of steps, but I don't think you had to do them all every time. When you're done, you have a new clothing item and are given a score and additional talent points. Baking is another option for crafting that yields consumable baked goods. This one had a shorter sequence of mini-games with individual games for mixing, pouring, and fire tending, with an additional last step to decorate if you're baking cupcakes. Tinkering is the final option for crafting and creates furniture. This crafting segment is contained in a single Tetris-like minigame where you attempt to combine groups of 3 out of the falling blocks. These crafting features were partially paywalled. All users could access the minigames through the practice mode, originally called community mode, but afterwards they were not able to keep the garment that they made. Only with the personal crafting mode did the player get to collect the item for themselves afterwards. Your clothing could be accessed through your Leaf Journal. You could store a maximum of 100 outfit items as a non-member and up to 600 as a member. From this page you could customize your fairy's outfits with the items that you purchased or crafted. Your Leaf Journal would also include a to-do list, your furniture storage, a place to fill out your profile for your My Pixie page, your progress in your talent skills, your badges, outfits for your animal friend, your crafting and tailoring patterns, your active quests, and finally the game options. Your My Pixie page was essentially your player profile and displayed your avatar within their room. On this page, players could view each other's information and leave messages. It also hosted some other interactive features like quizzes and polls. Pixie Hollow was loaded with minigames, both single-player and cooperative. One co-op form of gameplay was the Wilderness Adventures, which led a small group through a series of timed tasks. This, like most cool features from this game, was for members only. As with most minigame-centered virtual worlds, it's safe to assume that these games were of highly varying quality. Users could chat with each other through Speed Chat or Speed Chat Plus. This was pretty much identical to Toontown's chat system, down to the name. I assume that this is just Disney's proprietary chat system for kids' online games. In Pixie Hollow, the Speed Chat options were rethemed to be a bit more Pixie appropriate. You could request access to Speed Chat Plus by getting permission from a parent, or if you had your own email address, just do it yourself. Pixie Hollow utilized a paid membership system which came with the following perks: full access to the aforementioned crafting systems, access to exclusive shops, and access to early releases of minigames. The heart of the membership was really the ability to fully customize your avatar and living space. The ability to express yourself in this kind of fantasy environment is extremely enticing bait for subscriptions and microtransactions. These memberships could be purchased through the website directly or via in-store gift cards. When purchased online, these subscription-based memberships could only be canceled by calling into their customer support line, which I always think is a very scummy way to get people to avoid canceling their subscriptions, because you'll almost always be put through somebody whose job it is to convince you not to. Pixie Hollow's subscription price was $5.95 monthly, $29.95 semi-annually, and $57.95 yearly. The middle tier saves $11.50 per year, and the annual saves $13.45 yearly, admittedly better than Barbie Girl's couple cent bulk discount. Pixie Hollow had some related physical merchandise, and not just in the form of Disney Fairies dolls and playsets. These products were known as clickables, and could be used with both its own designated program and the Pixie Hollow virtual world. The clickable software, downloadable on Windows only, enabled you to integrate your clickables toy with your Pixie Hollow account, and gave access to a few different features depending on the specific toy that was purchased. The clickables friendship bracelet's primary purpose was linking real-life friends together on Pixie Hollow. After two activated devices touch, you'd have the option to become friends with each other, exchange gifts, and unlock messages that could be used in Pixie Hollow Speed Chat. There were 30 total bracelet-exclusive messages, with each one coming with 5 preloaded. The message and gifts sent out by connecting the devices could be customized with the clickable software. This device had some tie-in features with another of the clickable devices, which I'll get to shortly. The clickables jewelry box mostly served to unlock digital accessories for your Pixie avatar. These jewelry boxes claim with 3 clickable charms out of 31 total, which could be worn as a bracelet or scanned by the device to unlock a digital item. Presumably, you could purchase more charms on their own. This toy also served as a functional jewelry box. The Clickables Fairy game was the only device with its own screen, which allowed you to play its built-in fairy game. It's not very clear what the gameplay on this device was, but I think it's safe to assume that it was the kind of crappy handheld minigames that you get in like a Happy Meal box. By playing this game, you could earn Tink points, which would then be transferred to Pixie Hollow. However, the points couldn't be transferred unless the user also owned the friendship bracelet. Sold separately, of course. You may have noticed that Tink points is not a currency that really existed in Pixie Hollow. This is because Tink points were a clickable exclusive currency which would allow you to buy only one item, a butterfly which would follow your avatar around. These were not permanent items and would disappear after an unspecified limited time. You were able to buy more butterflies by playing the handheld device and gathering more Tink points. Pixie Hollow was actually not the only online Disney Fairies game release at the time. A mobile spin-off called Disney Fairies Fashion Boutique was released in September 2012. This was a fashion design simulator with a time management aspect where customers would come in requesting specific styles, and you'd have to complete the request to the best of your ability. You'd assemble the desired outfit according to their request and then be served a series of minigames reminiscent of Pixie Hollow's tailoring mechanic. The Disney Fairies Fashion Boutique utilized some typical microtransaction encouraging gameplay obstacles, such as forcing the player to wait to proceed. These obstacles rewarded the player for buying diamonds, ranging in denominations of 99 cents to $99. Completing some tasks in Pixie Hollow would allow the user to reduce their wait time on this game, which I believe was the only official integration with Pixie Hollow itself. This game is available for download via the Internet Archive, so long as you happen to have an Apple device that can't be updated past iOS 11. It's still playable because the online aspect is pretty insignificant. The only feature you're locked out of is visiting other people's boutiques. The Disney Fairies Fashion Boutique got taken off of the App Store pretty shortly after the closure of Pixie Hollow, and the entire Disney Fairies franchise ground to a halt pretty shortly after that. Disney had officially decided that the general public was over fairies. And that's about it for Pixie Hollow. What a cute, nice game. It's not like I had any major problems or anything. Oh god, that's a title card. Well, you didn't think I was going to talk about this game without getting into the financial aspects, did you? In fact, the mechanisms in place for predatory monetization in Pixie Hollow may be some of the worst that I've ever seen on a desktop-exclusive, child-specific game. Because the thing is, it wasn't always like that. And the fact that it wasn't always like that is the root of some of the most devious instances of exploiting your child audience that I've ever seen. Not just from this company, but from kids' virtual worlds in general. While I hadn't played this game myself, I had heard it described several times as Barbie girls but Disney fairies, which I thought gave me a pretty clear understanding of the general vibe of the site culture. Meaning, things got classist very quickly, and Disney was largely on board with this atmosphere because that means its user base is constantly putting pressure on each other to spend more money. However, I was not aware of the scope of this problem and just how bad it got in later years. It's standard practice in virtual worlds, especially ones with a split free-to-play and membership tier system, to have certain aspects of the game walled off to people who aren't paying. This is always going to result in some level of financially predatory behavior when the game in question is for children, but this practice is highly normalized and isn't likely to raise too many eyebrows nowadays. What is not standard practice, however, is taking features that were previously available to all players and moving that behind a paywall. And this is exactly the issue that Pixie Hollow suffered from that made its predatory monetization issue seem so exaggerated. The first thing that people tend to mention when it comes to financially motivated feature removal is the Create a Fairy overhaul from September 2009. From this point forward, players were no longer able to choose a custom outfit at registration, but instead had to grind or even later pay for materials to buy clothes if they wanted to wear anything but the default Arrival Day outfit. As you might imagine, players thought this change was extremely stifling. In a fashion-based social game like this, your outfit is your individuality. Restricting the player's ability to express themselves as an individual is an extremely manipulative method of convincing a child that they need to have a paid membership. In April 2011, Pixie Hollow introduced Talent Levels, a member-exclusive feature that yet again shifted a larger percent of the gameplay toward the paid tier. With the introduction of this feature, users could level themselves up by completing a list of tasks and be rewarded with a payout of items in return. The WordPress blog Marigold's Musings describes this new feature as a kind of dangling carrot for non-members. It seems like at first, from this member's perspective, there was just a cool new feature that everyone was able to enjoy. But once they hit level 3, they were confronted with a paywall. I find the way this was presented to be a pretty devious bait and switch. Another instance of feature removal came in November 2011, where the game was updated to restrict all players to having one fairy per Disney account instead of 3. I believe legacy players who had multiple fairies before this change were able to keep them, but after that, if you wanted to have more than one fairy, you'd need to make more than one Disney account. And if you wanted that fairy to have access to all the features of the game, you would need to pay membership again. That makes this another example of restricting options that would hypothetically become available to a user that is willing to pay more. The final FU to free-to-play users was the introduction of the alternative paid currency, Diamonds. This introduction came with sweeping and devastating changes to the accessibility of items by free-to-play users. Every single dress-up option previously available to all users became restricted to diamonds only. Free players could earn a limited amount of diamonds per month through gameplay, but anything after that, they would be forced to pay. Memberships were rewarded with diamond incentives, which increased depending on the length of your subscription cycle, starting with an allowance of 30 diamonds per month for weekly members and capping out at 240 diamonds per month for annual subscription holders. Near the end of the site's life, free-to-play users were all but barred from the dress-up aspect of the site. Not only could they only get the basic non-premium clothing items, they couldn't get more than a few per month. Before this change, how many basic clothes that free users would have access to would depend on how much time the user invested in gathering materials. After this change, there was essentially no point to the gathering mechanic for free-to-play users since only members could exchange their materials for diamonds. Diamonds were framed as making features more accessible to players without memberships, but in reality this does nothing to make those features more accessible to free-to-play users. There is still going to be a stark divide between the haves and have-nots, and despite how normalized it is now, I think it's pretty reprehensible to put this kind of pressure on children who have no concept of the value of money. The fake classism induced by this obvious visual divide has some very serious real-world implications because even more so now that gaming is more normalized, this carries over real life where actual children are getting bullied because their parents can't afford to buy them something that has absolutely zero real-world value. This fake classism absolutely becomes real-world classism as soon as it spills over into how people treat each other face-to-face, and I know for a fact that this kind of bullying can make kids extremely isolated and depressed. I think this becomes so much worse with microtransaction-based currencies over the standard limitations imposed by memberships, because that option for relatively low one-time payment over a higher recurring payment makes the divide between the haves and have-nots seem that much more severe. The elitist players will get it in their heads that, wow, these kids can't even afford to spend $5 one time, and the bullying against 100% free-to-play users becomes more severe as a result. And that's not to speak of the kind of fraud that's encouraged by this kind of monetization system. Kids are tearing through college tuitions worth of credit card balances because these games are designed to get them so hooked that they can't possibly prioritize anything else, and winning or not waiting or getting the newest, fanciest possible item is just a couple taps away at all times. Frankly, relative to how kids gaming has become in recent years, Pixie Hollow is not that bad, even with all the egregious feature removal. At least the maximum price of diamonds you can purchase in one go is only $35 instead of today's standard of $100 or more. However, I feel like it's clear that this choice was one of several made on the path to our current status quo of pelting children with microtransactions from all angles at all times. Pixie Hollow announced its closure on the same date as Toontown, August 20th, 2013, and would follow the same closure timeline, shuttering completely on September 19th, 2013. Like Toontown, Pixie Hollow released their membership limitations during this final period, allowing players to finally fully indulge in all the features that had been restricted from them. Unfortunately, the Disney Online Worlds wiki doesn't really have detailed information about these closure events, nor do other resources about this game. Pixie Hollow's closure was met with the same kind of desperate petition making that most of anything's closure tends to get, but unfortunately the vigor to immediately revive the project was just not there at the time. However, this would eventually change, as the resounding success of Toontown Rewritten would inspire other teams to take on similar revival projects. There are currently 2 major Rewritten projects for Pixie Hollow, although neither of them are in a completed state the way the previously mentioned game's revivals tend to be. There's one called Fairy ABC, which seems a bit dead, and the playable build also seems a bit dead. Well, I hope the best for this project, but I'm not sure that this one's doing so well. The other is We the Pixies, which is in a generally better state than Fairy ABC. The community is large and active, and the playable build is, well, playable. This is only a workable build and not a complete gameplay experience. Unfortunately, at least on my computer, this version is barely functional enough to be tolerable, at least as I'm playing this in early 2023. The game bugs out in a way that breaks the game more often than it doesn't, and the fact that there's no login element means it's pretty much impossible to make progress in regards to collecting and crafting, and I'm not entirely certain that the crafting feature has even been implemented yet. It feels like almost a guarantee that after about 8 to 10 loading screens, and that's if I'm lucky, the camera will get stuck in some irrelevant location and I won't be able to regain control of my fairy. Unlike Toontown Rewritten, I can't use this game to gather footage of what the original game looked like. However, there are definitely the bones of something with a lot of potential with this project, especially with the Create a Fairy segment, which is virtually identical to the game from pre-September 2009, while you could still select custom outfits. I'm hopeful that this game will become more stable over time, but I'm also not completely confident about it, at least in the form of a browser game like the original was. The death of Flash severely hampered the ability for games like this to continue existing, because other browser-based programming languages just don't tend to be as ideal for this kind of interactive experience. Put simply, Flash was hyper-optimized to make exactly this kind of game for internet browsers, and ever since it was discontinued, what we have left are things that are able to make this kind of game but aren't necessarily built for it. This means that many Flash revival projects built in newer programming environments and languages have a relatively small margin of error compared to the original medium. I suspect that this may be the cause behind the high frequency of crashes that I've noticed with this build. Okay, and so that is actually all I have about Pixie Hollow, and that marks the end of the big 3. I don't have the figures in front of me to confirm that these 3 were the most popular of Disney's MMOs, but there is a clear trend as far as cultural impact and just how many people have requested that I cover these 3. That is not all I have for Disney's virtual worlds. In part 2 of this video, I'm going to be looking into Virtual Magic Kingdom, Pirates of the Caribbean Online, Cars Online, Disney Channel's MMO Superbia, and a variety of other Disney Online ephemera. I honestly need to have a break from thinking about Disney for a little bit, because the never-ending cycle of creating a thing that children love and then killing it because it doesn't make enough money gets a little bleak. So I'm going to put one other video in front of my part 2 to this one, mostly because there's a thematically appropriate holiday coming up. Are you interested in learning how I make these videos? You can learn how with my newest Patreon exclusive video, where I look into the process of making these from filming to the final export. You can get access to my exclusive videos for only $5 per month, or you can get access to all channels of my Discord community for only $2.50 per month. On a related note, thank you Fishcatch, Ms. Goat, and Riley Meyer. You and every one of my patrons really mean the world to me. Tune in next time to be brainwashed by my eye beams of desire. Okay.